This is Hannibal here from The Hannibal TV on YouTube. Today I have a returning guest from the Galileo Project. He's also a professor of astrophysics at Harvard. He is known for his work with interstellar objects such as Oumuamua and the Three Eye Atlas object, which he just put out a new paper on. It's a highly controversial object, so thanks for joining us today to talk about this object.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. The object is not controversial. The interpretation that people may give it might be.
So, what is the latest? You've found out more. Are you more leaning on the side that it is just a comet, or are you leaning on the side that there's more to it than that at this point?
Well, I'm not decided. We don't have enough data or evidence to tell us the nature of the object. In terms of the best information we have about the content of the object, there is a plume of gas around it that is made mostly of CO2, carbon dioxide, 87% by mass, and then carbon monoxide, 9% by mass, and 4% is water. And there is also a rapidly rising release of cyanide and nickel without iron. But this is only coming from the surface of the object. And, for the same reason that we are advised not to judge a book by its cover, we should not infer the nature of the object by the composition of its skin, because any object, any solid object that is going through interplanetary space, interstellar space, would collect materials on the surface, and we might be seeing just those materials, on the very thin layer that surrounds the object, in the plume of gas around it that is released as a result of the warming by sunlight. But we don't know what the object is made of. And there are a number of anomalies about this object that we can get into, and they convinced me to take it quite seriously, because about a couple of months ago, after the object was discovered, I invented a scale that is now called the Loeb scale, and a 0 rank on that scale implies a natural object like an icy rock, a comet or an asteroid. The rank 10 implies a technological object that could be a threat to humanity on Earth. And right now I would rank it as 4 still, because we're waiting for more data. And I can explain why I give it a 4, which is a significant rank. If there is a car racing down the street and it has a 40% chance of hitting you, you better keep your eyes on the car. I mean, it's a significant rank. So the reason I give it that rank, that there is a chance it's technological, is because, first of all, the path of this object into the solar system was aligned to within 5 degrees with the plane of the planets around the sun. And the chance for that happening at random for an orbit that goes opposite to the motion of the planets, the way this object goes, the chance is 1 in 500. So it's really surprising that the trajectory was already designed or fine-tuned to meet planets along its path. And moreover, the timing of the arrival is such that the object will come very close to Mars and on October 3rd, just next week. And then after that, close to Jupiter on March 16th, 2026. And in addition, the size of the object is really quite large. And in fact, yesterday I put out a paper that is using all the data we have so far. And that includes observations from 227 observatories around the world, around the Earth. There are more than 4,000 observations of this object. And it also analyzes data from space telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope. And based on all the data, we can say that we don't see evidence for the object maneuvering or changing a path that is sculpted just by gravity. And that means that we do see the object evaporating, losing some mass. And if it was a small object, the mass loss that was measured by the Webb telescope of about 150 kilograms per second, that's roughly the mass of a person per second, that would have pushed the object back, because this mass loss is mostly towards the sun. And we don't detect that kind of a push, meaning that the object is very massive. And I derived a lower limit, a minimum mass that the object may have. It's 33 billion tons. It needs to be more massive than that in order not for us not to notice the push that is acting on it from the fact that it evaporates. And that is a pretty large mass, because it means the diameter of a solid object needs to be bigger than 5 kilometers, half the size of Manhattan Island. This is the minimum size, and it could go all the way up to 46 kilometers, 10 times more. We just don't know in this range where it lies, but it's definitely a very massive object. And just to illustrate why it's so unusual, the previous two objects were Oumuamua, discovered in 2017, and that one was 100,000 times less massive than this limit, that the minimum mass of 3I Atlas. So that means that, given that there is a limited amount of material in interstellar space, you would expect to find 100,000 Oumuamua-like objects before you discover one giant object that is 100,000 times more massive than Oumuamua, simply because there is not enough mass to deliver such a giant rock to our vicinity within the last decade. You expect such a giant object to arrive once per 10,000 years or more. So that is already a very startling result, that the object is extremely massive. And we know that because it's not changing its trajectory as a result of evaporation. There would have been a rocket effect pushing it. We don't see any evidence of that. That means the object is very massive, very large. So that's one anomaly of this object that I knew all along from the beginning. And I also calculated, just a few days after the object was discovered, I calculated that there is not enough mass in interstellar space to deliver such a rock, a giant rock of this size, to our vicinity within a decade. And you miss the mark by orders of magnitude, factors of thousands or tens of thousands. So it's really surprising that we are seeing such a giant object after we've seen Oumuamua so small. And also the second object was discovered in 2019. It's called Borisov, and that was also on the scale of hundreds of meters, like Oumuamua, and much less massive, 1,000 times less massive than the limit that I mentioned. So the question is, why is it so big? How come this object is so big? And why is it following this path that is aligned with the plane of the planets? But on top of that, we see nickel without iron in the plume of gas surrounding it. And the only other place where we saw it before is in nickel alloys that are produced industrially. So that raises the possibility that maybe we're looking at an artificial object that was technologically manufactured. And there is another anomaly, which is really strange, that usually what happens around comets is that they get evaporated, the ice on them is evaporated as a result of sunlight impinging on the surface. And that releases dust particles that scatter sunlight. And when the dust scatters sunlight, it gets pushed away from the sun by the radiation pressure of the sun. And you see it as a cometary tail. So cometary tails are pushed away from the sun. You see an elongated plume of dust that reflects sunlight. That's the appearance of a comet. Instead, what we saw here in July and August is that there is scattered light in front of the object, towards the sun, not away from the sun, but towards the sun. And moreover, it was 10 times longer than it was wide. We almost saw it edge on, but not exactly edge on. So we saw it on the sky, twice as long as it is wide. But if you correct for the projection effect, it's actually sort of like a jet of scattered light in front of the object towards the sun. And this is the first time we saw such a thing for a comet. And all of these are anomalies that the comet experts just ignore. I mean, either ignore or say, well, it's a big comet and it happens to be on this trajectory and it does shed gas, but they don't go into the details of nickel without iron. They don't go into the details that it's mostly carbon dioxide and not water as they predicted. They just ignore it and then they say, okay, well, it's a comet. And I say that no, I mean, we should pay attention to these anomalies, and they could represent something new that we've never seen before in the solar system. It may be alien technology, maybe something that would change the way we think about our place in the universe. And there is a way to figure it out by collecting more data, more evidence. The one difference between a dogmatist, someone that believes in a dogma, and a curious scientist is that if you give both of them a lot of data, the curious scientist, the genuine scientist, would be thrilled because that's an opportunity to learn. But the dogmatist would be really worried because there might be anomalies that challenge past ideas, past knowledge, and the dogmatist would prefer to shove all the anomalies under the carpet of traditional thinking. And that's what we're seeing. And the truth, is that scientific knowledge is not a matter of authority. It's not for NASA to tell us what the answer is. It's for the data. There are no experts when you deal with a blind date with an interstellar visitor. We are dealing with something new, and we shouldn't judge whatever we see by what we already know about objects within the solar system. And therefore, we should be just curious and see what the data shows us. And just the fact the object is very massive on a special trajectory, has an unusual composition that includes nickel without iron, that already tells us something is unusual about it. And when it comes close to Mars on October 3rd, that's next week, we will have the best opportunity to image it. We could get a high resolution image that is 100 times better than the image obtained by the Hubble Space Telescope from a large distance. There is a camera called HiRISE on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter around Mars, and that was launched by NASA. And this camera can get a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers when this object passes within 29 million kilometers from Mars. So that would allow us to get a very good constraint on the actual size of the object. Just from the brightest pixel, the plume of gas around the object is transparent. We can look through it. And then with the high resolution from HiRISE camera, we should be able to get a very good sense of how bright is the nucleus of the object, the actual solid part of the object. We might know that within a week. And that's very exciting. And then on October 29th, it will pass closest to the sun. Unfortunately, we won't be able to observe it from Earth because the Earth would be on the opposite side of the sun. The sun will be in our way. We won't be able to see this object. But that is the time when the sun warms it and the most. And if it's a comet, we would see it responding to that by a very enhanced evaporation, and we might learn more about it. And then on March 16, 2026, it will come very close to Jupiter, and the spacecraft Juno that is parked around Jupiter will be able to probe it. And that would be also very interesting. And I had a phone call a few weeks ago from Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who wanted to learn more about 3I Atlas. And I mentioned the opportunity to observe it with NASA instruments. And she wrote a letter to the head of NASA encouraging Sean Duffy to use these facilities. So I very much hope we will take advantage of all the space probes that we have to learn more about 3I Atlas.
Is there any chance at all that it will change directory once it goes behind the sun and maybe get some type of charge from the sun? Or is it 100% going to stay on track to head towards Jupiter by March, as you mentioned?
Well, if it's a natural object, we already put very tight limits on the level of non-gravitational acceleration, the level of force acting on it as a result of its evaporation. And therefore, it will pretty much move along the path that we expect if it's natural. However, if it's technological, it might maneuver when it comes close to the sun. That's the point along the path where you get the most benefit from the gravitational assist of the sun. That's where when we launch a spacecraft that we want to boost in speed, we time the boosts when the object is closest to the sun. And so if 3I Atlas is technological, there might be a maneuver. And in that case, of course, the stock market will crash if that happens. But that will be only in case it's technological. And in addition, you can imagine it releasing mini probes that are sent to the various planets. It's moving opposite to the motion of the planets, and that has the benefit that you don't have to chase the planets like Mars or the Earth. And you can just send the mini probes from a mothership that would reach those planets. And I told the research team of the Galileo project that I'm leading to look in the months ahead whether there is any unusual activity near Earth. We have 3 observatories, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, and a third one in Nevada, where we are monitoring the entire sky at all times. And if there is anything released by 3I Atlas, we might be able to see it. The same is true for the Mars orbiters. There is the NASA reconnaissance orbiter around Mars, but there is also one by the European Space Agency. There is another one by the Chinese Space Agency. So they might also monitor any unusual activity over there. And finally, with Jupiter, the Juno spacecraft might do that. So we shall see. I mean, we don't know. We have to watch it. And it's just like a blind date with an object that we are not familiar with. When you go on a blind date, my advice is observe the other side. Don't say much, just watch the other side and listen to it, and then you learn about it. And that's what we should do in this case. Unfortunately, experts, people who worked on comets within the solar system, they are very much attracted to the possibility that it may be just an object similar to what they've known before, because this way they can explain it and argue that they are the expert. They maintain their stature. However, nature is known to be more imaginative than us, and my view is we should just observe it and learn more about it. And I would change my rank from 4 downwards if it ends up being natural, or upwards if it ends up being technological.
Yeah, speaking of that, Ross Coldhart was kind of hard on you last weekend, and I'll just put the clip up because I thought it was kind of mean of him to say. So let's just get your reaction. It's only about less than 2 minutes.
This is the 3I Atlas object, which is, if some people are saying it correctly, a comet. If you're Professor Avi Loeb, you think it's potentially something anomalous. Let's deal also with the claims that have been made, mainly by Professor Avi Loeb, who is driving, God bless him, a lot of other astronomers to distraction with his persistent assertions that there is something anomalous about 3I Atlas. The ball is very much in Professor Avi Loeb's court right now to prove his case that there is something anomalous about 3I Atlas and that it's just not it's not just another meteor or comet. I've consulted with astronomers. I've consulted with people who've contacted me in great frustration because they don't understand why Professor Loeb is making such a huge song and dance on very, very limited evidence that there is something anomalous about 3I Atlas. And I've been very willing to give Professor Loeb a good go because I have huge respect for him. He's very, very well respected in the field. And I just have a hunch that just maybe he's had a tip, a private tip from somebody in NASA or some other space observatory telling him that there is something anomalous about 3I Atlas. But certainly the official position from a broad range of astronomers that I've engaged with is thus, that there is no anomalous behavior or movement detected with 3I Atlas. The most recent scientific assessments, including orbital solutions from the Minor Planet Center and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, indicate that 3I Atlas follows a trajectory fully consistent with gravitational dynamics for an interstellar comet.
So there you go. He's kind of rude with the way he says comet there at the end. What was your response to that?
Well, with all due respect, Ross Coulthart is not a scientist. And the statement he made in the last sentence is exactly the basis for a scientific paper that I submitted for publication last night. There is no non-gravitational acceleration, despite the fact that there is evaporation from the object. That means the object is very massive, anomalously massive, 1,000 times more massive than Borisov, the previous object, and 1,000,000 times more massive than Oumuamua. And this is just the lower limit. That's the minimum mass that is needed in order for it not to show any push back away from the sun. So if you see, an object that is, let's say, a dust particle, you see twice an object of the size of a dust particle, and then you see a boulder that is 1,000,000 times more massive appearing. Wouldn't that be curious? Wouldn't that be strange? Wouldn't that be anomalous? And just to remind whoever is viewing this, Ross himself keeps talking for years about unidentified anomalous phenomena. So he makes a living out of talking, not doing science, just talking and speaking to other people who do science. And he himself is engaged with things that appear anomalous. I'm doing the science. I published scientific papers. I wrote 9 scientific papers over the past 2 months on 3I Atlas. I'm not a journalist asking for the advice of other people to tell me what this object is. I'm actually doing the research to tell me what the object is. So for a journalist to go around and solicit consensus view about an object and then talk for years about anomalous phenomena that the same people that he's talking with right now would completely dismiss as irrelevant. The same UAP that he keeps talking about, UFOs, UAP, and he talks about it for many, many, many broadcasts. If he were to go to the same people that he talked with about 3I Atlas, they would completely dismiss that as irrelevant. Yet, he believes that there are unidentified anomalous phenomena and he keeps talking about it forever. But for 3I Atlas, no. He will go to the same people that dismiss UAP and ask for their advice and then use sort of an average over their opinions to claim that when Avi Loeb does scientific work on this object, we should not accept it. Why? Because a group of other people said to him that we should not consider any anomalies. And I say, well, exactly this sentence that he said at the end, where the object doesn't show any non-gravitational acceleration, that sentence is an anomaly. Why? Because in order for the object not to be affected by its evaporation, it needs to be extremely massive, anomalously massive, 1,000,000 times more massive than Oumuamua. And we haven't seen 1 million Oumuamuas. So, why would we not consider that as an issue? Why would we say, okay, well, it's just a giant object that appears after we saw tiny objects, and that's not an anomaly. It's just another object. Let's not even think about it. Why would we ignore the fact that it's in the plane of the planets? That's an anomaly. So the current consensus of those people that he spoke with is that 3I Atlas is just an unusually large object that is on an unusually fine-tuned trajectory with the planets by chance. So it's big by chance. It's aligned with the planets by chance. It has nickel without iron by chance. It had a plume of scattered light ahead of it towards the sun instead of behind it, away from the sun, the way comets show, by a process that we don't understand but we don't care about. And it will come close to Mars and Jupiter by chance. So the timing was particularly, fine-tuned, but by chance. And, all of these coincidences, each of them has a low probability. Some of them we've never seen before for comets in the solar system, including the polarization of light. I didn't even mention that, but the light is polarized in a way that was never seen in a comet before. It has a very negative polarization. And all of these are scientific matter, scientific facts. I wrote 9 scientific papers about these facts, submitted them to journals, and then Ross, who keeps talking forever about unidentified anomalous phenomena, decides to realize what this object is by asking around people, just asking astronomers that he would like to pick. And my question to him is, why don't you ask the same astronomers about UAP and say the same thing that they say about UAP, because that's what they tell you?
That's a very good point. Several people on here have been asking about this second object that's supposedly on its way from Jupiter and it's going to be behind the sun sometime around October 29th. What can you tell us about this object?
Well, there is a comet that happens to come from the direction of the sun, but it's it's clear that it originated from a direction which is very different from the arrival direction of 3I Atlas. So it has nothing to do with it, and we can figure out its trajectory, and it's actually bound to the sun, definitely bound to the sun, arriving from a distance that is related to where Jupiter is. And so there are many comets, many asteroids that belong to the solar system, and this is one of them. I don't think this has any anomaly that would ask for special attention. There are many rocks in the solar system. They are the building blocks of the planets, and they were left behind, and we know about them, and some of them just appear out of the blue because they were far away for a while. This object has a period around the sun that is 500 years. So last time it visited us so close was 500 years ago. Nobody was looking around that time with telescopes of the type that we use today. So I don't think we should pay too much attention to this object more than there's so many other rocks that exist in the solar system. This is just our backyard. There are plenty of rocks. What is unusual about interstellar objects like 3I Atlas is they have a very high speed. And because of that, they are not bound to the sun by gravity. The speed of 3I Atlas outside the solar system was 60 kilometers per second, about 600 times the fastest car that is used in car races. And the reason I know that is because a racer in the NASCAR car race approached me, and he wants to put an image of 3I Atlas and an image of me on the hood of his car in a race that will take place in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. And so I calculated for him. I said the 3I Atlas would be moving is moving at 600 times, your car at the fastest that you can go, and that's quite remarkable. That it's moving so fast.
Someone's asking, and I haven't heard about this, could the emergency meeting of military generals and naval admirals today have anything to do with 3i Atlas? And just one more question. If it by any chance does start coming this way, is there anything we could actually do about it at this point?
Well, it's moving relative to Earth as it comes close to the sun at a speed of up to 100 kilometers per second. That's 3 times faster than the fastest rocket we ever launched. So there is no way for us to intercept it before it gets closest to the sun. And then, after that, if it maneuvers and arrives close to Earth, there is not much we can do about it. And the situation would be, if it's advanced technologies that we don't possess, we might feel just like the Iranian air defense system when the B-2 bombers showed overhead. If you're dealing, and there the gap in technology was, just several decades. Here we are dealing with potentially millions or billions of years difference if there is an alien technology that arrived at our backyard before we even left the solar system. They might have science and technology well beyond what we possess. I should also mention that Arthur C. Clarke, in his book Rendezvous with Rama, had in mind a spacecraft that is cylindrical, has a 20-kilometer diameter by 50-kilometer length, and that's not very far from the dimensions of 3i Atlas. And I just obtained a lower limit on the size of 5 kilometers, but it might be much bigger. There are other indications that it's of order 15 kilometers or even all the way up to several tens of kilometers in diameter. Just to remind everyone, this is the scale of Manhattan Island in a single object. And that's why I find this object quite unusual, because Oumuamua was roughly the size of a football field. Compare Manhattan Island to a football field. That's the difference in scales. So we saw 2 objects on the scale of a football field, and now we see an object on the scale of Manhattan Island. And Ross Coulthart is saying, I consulted with people and they told me that it's not anomalous.
Yeah, and you talk about Arthur C. Clarke. Someone had a question related to that. He said some models suggest that engineered structures could achieve large apparent mass with thin walls if the density were high. Have you considered hollow or composite geometries in your modeling, and how might such configurations alter your interpretation? Or has he read Arthur C. Clarke's books too many times to come up with that thought?
No, I actually didn't read it even once. But the limit we get is on the total mass, because we know how much force is acting on it, how much momentum is exerted on it per time. So we know the force pushing it, and in order for us not to notice if it any motion of it relative to the trajectory of that is shaped by gravity alone, we know that it needs to be very massive. So from that, I get a lower limit on the mass. How massive should it be in order for us not to notice the push that is exerted on it? And then the question of how big it is depends on the composition, of course. So if you make it hollow, you still need to accommodate this mass limit. It would mean that it's even bigger than I estimated. I just assumed that it's a solid density throughout, and I got a size of 5 kilometers. If you make it hollow, it should be even bigger to accommodate this mass. We don't know what it's made of. All we see is a gas that is evaporated from the outermost layer. I calculated over a period of several months. It's only a layer of less than a millimeter that is creating the coma of gas around it. So a lot of people say, wow, that's a giant plume of gas that is extending out to 350,000 kilometers that was observed by the Sphere-X observatory, space observatory. It's huge. We can see the carbon dioxide, and the Webb telescope also detected the same. And so we know that there is a huge plume of gas, but it's very dilute. It's a very faint comet, actually. There was no cometary tail until the end of August. All there was some extension of scattered sunlight in front of the object towards the sun, another anomaly that Ross is preferring to ignore because he consulted with astronomers and they told him that it's a comet. So the object itself may be of a very different substance than the surface layer that is millimeter thick. That's all you need, just to ablate over a period of a few months a millimeter thick layer from an object that is of order 5 to 50 kilometers in diameter. And that would give you the plume of gas that is very rarefied, but it goes out to large distances. The telescopes can detect it because it's illuminated by sunlight, so we can detect it. The telescopes are big, the Webb telescope and ground-based telescope. So we can detect the gas, but there is not much gas, not much dust surrounding the object, and you just need a layer of order a millimeter to accommodate that over a period of a few months that we have been observing it. And so we don't know what's inside, and we don't know the mean density. We don't know what it's made of. And my hope is that when it comes close to the high-rise camera around Mars, that we would get a good look at the object itself, because the pixel size would be about 30 kilometers, and then we can learn more. So it's not a matter of asking around astronomers what this object is. To figure out what it is, we need to observe it, and that's where the answer would come from, not by going around and polling people. It's not a political question that we should find an answer by asking a lot of people to average their answers and figure out the answer, the popular answer. Science is not a popularity contest. And it's really ridiculous to go around and ask people what this object is. That's not the way to find the answer. Maybe it's the way to find the answer for a journalist, but it's not the actual way to find an answer. The actual way to find an answer is by observing it with as much data as possible and using the data to figure out what it is. And if the object doesn't show a cometary tail for 2 months and just shows a glow towards the sun instead of behind, away from the sun, then it's different from familiar comets. If the object is, up to 1 million times more massive than Oumuamua, then it's anomalous. If the object has a chance of 1 in 500 to appear within the plane of the planets, then it's anomalous, because you should have seen hundreds of objects before one of them would be by chance aligned. And so these are anomalies. I'm not saying it's not natural for sure. I'm just saying we should be intrigued by the anomalies rather than go around and ask people that would tell us that it's nothing interesting, because that's not the way science is done. That's not the way we figure out the truth. And think about FIFA, the Soccer World Organization. If FIFA would have asked Ross to figure out whether there was a goal or not in a controversial goal on a soccer match, Ross will go around and ask the players, ask the audience, what do you think? Was there a goal or not? And figure out some answer. But the way FIFA does it is not ask Ross Coulthard to poll around people and figure out what happened. They use a camera, a video camera, and see whether the goal was scored or not, depending on what the imagery shows. That's the way science is done, collecting evidence. We are not going around and asking people about what the answer is. We just use instruments to figure it out. I am a scientist. I've been a practicing scientist for 4 decades. I wrote more than 1,000 scientific papers. And the irony of the situation is that I'm still doing science. I'm in the trenches. I just wrote a paper last night talking about how massive this object is. And then you find a journalist, just like a commentator saying, oh no, that's not correct statement because I went around and asked people about it. I mean, this is really ridiculous.
One thing he mentioned that a fan is asking if you could be more specific on is he accused you of perhaps having an insider tip from NASA that some of the other astronomers might not have. Could you address that?
Yeah, so he's not the first one. As soon as 3i Atlas appeared, and I stated that it has some anomalies, just a couple of days after it was discovered, I wrote a scientific paper that was published saying that it's unusually big. That what I'm concluding also from my latest paper. And at that time, there were two things that immediately appeared on social media. One, some conspiracy theorists were saying, well, this is to deflect our attention from the Epstein files. Avi is bringing up these anomalies to deflect our attention from the Epstein files. And just think how ridiculous that is, because I need to be more influential than the Pope to arrange for an object far away from Earth at a distance at that time of 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation. I can't fake it because observatories on Earth see it. Any person that purchases a telescope on, you can buy it online, bigger than 0.5 meter, can see this object. So the object is out there. And then you look at it from the Webb telescope that is 1 million miles away from Earth, and you see the object at the right position. That means that the object is out there at 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation. So for Avi Loeb to invent an object or create an object that is at that distance from Earth, that is of the order of 10 kilometers in size, that's crazy. I mean, how can that be arranged to deflect attention from the Epstein file? This object appeared. It's not a conspiracy. We can see it with you can buy a telescope, look at the sky, and you will see it. It's not fake. You can just look at it. And as I said, there were 4,022 observations so far of it from telescopes all around the globe. So how can I conspire all these amateur astronomers and professional astronomers using different telescopes at their pleasure, at random times over the past 4.5 months, observing this object? In fact, the object was seen even before it was discovered by telescopes that were monitoring the sky. You go back to the data and you see the object. How can that be arranged? There is no way to conspire because these are completely independent people, including amateurs. This includes data sets that were collected before the object was announced. So there is no way to fake it. And I cannot do that. I don't have the power to do that. So that's one thing that appeared. Then there was another thing that Ross may have been influenced by, and the claim that this is a deflection from the study of UAP near Earth, and that was being coordinated. And again, this has no merit because I learned about this object first time during an interview with Coast to Coast on the night that it was discovered. It was 2 a.m. and then one of the listeners emailed me that a new object was discovered. I looked at it. I estimated the size of the object from its brightness, and I wrote a paper about it. That's it. Has nothing to do with anything, beyond that. Now, the new meeting that Pete Hegseth is arranging, I would be really surprised if it has anything to do beyond the defense considerations of the U.S. military or things to do with the personnel, because there are obviously cuts in the amount of people and budget that in various sections of the military. And I don't know any details, but that's what I would guess it's about. And of course, there is no additional knowledge that I have from NASA about this object beyond all the scientific data that everyone has access to. So no, there is nothing beyond what I write about in my scientific publications, in my essays on medium.com. And just as a general rule, what you see is what you get when you are in dialogue with me. I'm not hiding anything. I don't have an agenda. I announce that something is anomalous when it's anomalous. And I'm not averaging over the opinions of other people. I'm just telling you what I think.
Teresa has a good question here. Also, speaking of NASA, what happened to the pictures that they took this month that haven't been released yet? Are they going to be released?
I'm not sure which images she's referring to, but there were in terms of NASA there were observations first with the Hubble Space Telescope, and that gave us this image of elongated glow towards the sun that I mentioned. That was the highest resolution image we had so far, because the Hubble Space Telescope has a very good angular resolution. And then after that, so that was on July 21st, 2025. And then after that, on August 6th, 2025, there was an observation of by the Webb telescope of 3I Atlas, and that gave us the composition of mostly carbon dioxide, as I mentioned, of the plume of gas around it. The Webb telescope is an amazing instrument that is able also to take a spectrum with very high fidelity, and that's what gave us an extremely good composition assessment. And then between August 8th to 12th, there was another observatory called Spherex in space that observed the object. And the one difference from the Webb telescope is that in addition to confirming the composition of mostly carbon dioxide, they have a very large field of view, so they could tell that the plume of carbon dioxide extends out to at least 350,000 kilometers. So a very large distance around the object. And so that was also a NASA project, the Spherex Space Observatory. And I'm not aware of any additional data or image that was taken by NASA Space Observatory since then. And I know that the high-res camera team on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, I spoke with the principal investigator of that camera, and they're planning to take an image next week when 3I Atlas comes closest to Mars. So that would be the next, around October 3rd, October 2nd, that's when they will take the data. I'm not sure how quickly they will release it, but that's, again, NASA data.
The one question I have for you, someone's mentioning it would be the perfect candidate for an alien craft entering the solar system. If you were going to send a craft to a different solar system, would you make it look like a typical UFO that we would be aware of, or would you disguise it? And also, I heard Ross say, well, it's moving too slow to be an alien craft because we see them moving a lot faster. You mentioned this thing is the size of Manhattan. I haven't seen anything the size of Manhattan before in any video.
That's right. So we don't know much. If we are visited, we don't know much about the intent and any technology that is being used. And my point is, we should not assume anything. We should not guess anything. We should just observe and figure out what it's like. And the first thing for us to figure out is whether it's a natural object or technological. If it's technological, then we should get as much data as possible to decide how to respond to it, because it's very different from getting a radio signal from thousands of light years away, where you have the leisure to decide when to respond. There is plenty of time, that there is no imminent threat. Here, the visitor could maneuver and come through your front door, and we will have to decide. And I'm not expecting this to happen until we have a clear proof that we are dealing with a technological object. But once we do, we might not have a lot of time. And so we have to keep that in mind, that there are contingency plans very often in the intelligence agencies, in the Defense Department, for circumstances that are unlikely. They have a low probability, but we need to be prepared for that. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's definitely technological. I'm just saying there is a number of anomalies that we should be aware of, and therefore we should monitor it and get as much additional information as possible. And we should be prepared that if something like that, now in a new era where the Rubin Observatory in Chile will find an interstellar object every few months, we should check each and every such object, whether it's a rock or maybe a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor, maybe some artificial object. And it's just something we have to keep in mind and not insist that everything entering the solar system must be a rock. And frankly, this is only the third object. So we don't know much. We don't have a training data set to say, oh, we looked at 1 million objects and none of them is technological. Therefore, we should pretty much assume, and that would be a fair assumption, that it's not technological. This is just the third one, and it already shows some anomalies. The first one was also anomalous. It was pushed away from the sun without showing any cometary evaporation. That was Oumuamua. So I'm just saying, we are still in our learning period, and we don't know how abundant are technological objects in interstellar space. So given that, and given that there are claims for unidentified anomalous phenomena near Earth, we should keep our eyes on the ball, the way that basketball coaches advise their team. We should just look at this object and figure out what it is, rather than go around and ask people for their opinion and average that and say there is nothing there. This is really not professional to do that, especially from someone who is focused on finding anomalous objects near Earth.
Would you say it's more likely, considering it's going to the sun, passing by Mars and Jupiter, that it would be just a reconnaissance probe? Or how likely would it be that there's actually some type of either AI fake being inside or real being?
Well, I don't want to guess. I just want to look at all the data we collect. So I mentioned the anomalies that are known as so far. And if as the object gets close to the sun, it will, if it's a comet, if it's a natural object, then it would get evaporated more vigorously because it will get heated by the sun. It's just like the interrogation tactics of getting the truth out from interrogation is to put whoever you're interrogating in a very extreme environment. And that's what will happen when this object will come close to the sun. It will be heated much more than far away. The heating is the scales as 1 over the distance squared. So as it gets twice as close, it gets 4 times the heat per unit time. And we will see how it responds to that. If it evaporates just like a comet, and we take a good look at it with a high-res camera and it looks like a comet, then maybe it is an unusual comet that happens to be on an unusual trajectory, that happens to be unusually close to Mars. And all of these unusual things, sometimes they happen. Sometimes lightning strikes twice, I don't know, but here it needs to strike several times, maybe 5 times. But we should stay curious, and get as much because the minute we will stop seeking data is where we would maintain our ignorance, and that's not a good thing. Now, of course, even if it's a rock, that will teach us something about rocks that form near other stars. They might have a very unusual birthplace, and we can learn more from that. If we ever see another one as big as this one, we should plan to intercept it, land on it, bring some materials back to Earth. Even if that's a rock, we can check if it has the building blocks of life as we know it. We did bring back 120 grams of material from the asteroid Bennu. That's an asteroid within the solar system. And guess what? These materials were analyzed over the past year, and the laboratory tests found most of the amino acids, the building blocks of life, in it. So even on a rock, that is not a planet like the Earth, there were the building blocks of life in the solar system. But the question is, what happens near other stars? And that's a completely different approach to astrobiology, to searching for life, because currently the mainstream of astronomers, the same ones that Ross goes around and asks, that mainstream is focused on searching for microbes by looking for the chemical fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets. But what I'm saying is there is a completely different approach that one can take. Instead of looking for microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets, which is a very difficult task. It's just like having houses on your street and you're saying, I live in my house, I want to figure out if there are microbes in the other houses on my street. And of course, for that, you need to build an infrastructure, a giant infrastructure of telescopes that, it would be really difficult to detect microbes down the street from a distance. However, if there is a resident in one of those houses, that resident might come to visit you, might throw a tennis ball that you would find in your backyard, or you might see a construction project in that house where the resident is. So what I'm saying is it's a very different approach to look for a resident. But even if there are only microbes, it's much better to check a rock that came from a neighbor's yard rather than look from a distance at the neighbor's house. Because it's easy. When you get an interstellar object as big as 3I Atlas, it's easy to retrieve materials from it, bring it to Earth, and study them. And it took probably such an object millions to billions of years to travel through interstellar space from a very distant origin. And if we wanted to go there and collect the same materials, it would take us millions to billions of years to get there. So we can save the time. The object already made it, travel the distance. All we need is to scoop some material from it and learn what happens near other stars. This is an approach that was never discussed in the scientific literature of the experts that Ross is consulting with.
Quick question here. When is going to be the best chance to get an image? Is it going to be in early October, as you mentioned, or will there be another point, maybe when it gets out from behind the sun, that might be better?
Well, you need to bring the camera close to the object to get the highest resolution image. So it's not just a question of how bright is the object, and it's really all about how close you can get to it. And given that the object comes close to Mars, that's an amazing opportunity that gives us the ability to resolve it 100 times better than the Hubble Space Telescope, and down to the scale of 30 kilometers. The Hubble Space Telescope resolved it on a scale of a few thousand kilometers. And now, on October 3rd, we will be able to get an image with a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers, 100 times better. And that will be our best shot at getting a high resolution image. There is no way for us to send a camera from Earth that would intercept the object. In fact, the only opportunity we had to actually intercept the object is by using Juno near Jupiter. And I wrote a scientific paper that was already published about Juno, showing that if we had all the fuel that Juno had to start with, it could have actually collided with 3I Atlas along its path. It could have reached it, got very close to it. However, much of the fuel was already used, so it will only be able to observe it from a distance. And the best opportunity we already have on October 3rd is to use the high-rise camera and other cameras that the Europeans have or the Chinese have to get high-resolution images. And I very much look forward to that. It's only a week away.
I'll just throw in two quick questions here from Darcy Weir, who's a filmmaker that I know. What is your thoughts after working with Sean Kirkpatrick about people saying that he's trying to use the AARO platform back when he was involved with it to debunk everything to do with UAPs?
Yeah, so he basically, as soon as he was appointed director of AARO, he asked if he can meet with me. He came to my home, we met, and then he said that maybe we should write a paper together. I told him he wanted to know about the Galileo project that I'm leading, and I mentioned it to him. And so then I wrote mostly a draft of a paper, sent it to him. He never got it approved, and I just put it on my website. And then that is the paper. It's mostly things that I put into it. I didn't really partner with him. I didn't collaborate with him, but I heard, that very heavy criticism about the way he handled the interactions with possible witnesses and with the data. So I don't have anything to add because I never had a close relationship with him. And I would completely sympathize with those people who argue that he did not reveal everything that was given to him. And because, the same people actually testified before Congress, and some of them said that they tried to meet with him and he said that he was never contacted, and situations of that nature, that I cannot get into because I was not close to him in any way. Yeah, I mean, I completely sympathize with those who know more about it, and there was also heavy criticism of his directorship during the last hearing that we had in Congress.
And last question here. What did you think about NASA's announcement about signs of life on Mars and fossils? I was going to ask you about that as well. And that kind of falls into what you were just talking about. We're supposed to get excited about all of this where there's evidence of things happening a lot closer to home.
Yeah, so Mars, is a planet somewhat smaller than Earth that had very similar conditions. It had an atmosphere like the early Earth had, and there was definitely liquid water on the surface of Mars for half of its lifespan in the first few billion years. And there were lakes, rivers, oceans of water. And it's very likely that the primitive life in the form of microbes developed on it. Mars actually cooled before the Earth to temperatures that allow life to exist because it's a smaller body. It had more surface area. Most of the heat leaks out from the surface area. So the amount of heat the object contains is proportional to its mass. The rate by which it loses heat is proportional to its surface area. So a smaller body has more surface for its mass, and therefore Mars cooled before the Earth, and therefore it could have had life before the Earth. And it's possible that life was delivered to Earth from Mars because the two planets exchanged rocks. And we know that life can survive the trip on a rock from Mars to Earth because there was one rock that was analyzed 4 decades ago, and it was concluded that the rock that came from Mars was not heated by more than 40 degrees Celsius, allowing potentially, if there was life in the core of the rock, this Martian rock, it would have survived the trip, the journey. And so it's quite possible that we are all Martians, that life started on Mars and then delivered to Earth. So finding microbes or evidence for microbes in early Mars, would not be surprising at all. It would be, nevertheless, it would be an important breakthrough, and we will be able potentially to check if it's the same life as we know it here on Earth. Now, it's very difficult to decide what the current evidence, how reliable it is. It shows these spots that are indicative of microbial life on Earth in a place where there used to be a lake on Mars, Jezero, and all the indications are fully consistent with microbes producing the way the rocks look like. However, to be sure of that, we need to bring the rocks back to Earth and analyze them in laboratories for the isotopic composition. That will tell us for sure the pathway by which the chemistry was brought to the surface of these rocks, and whether it was microbes or something else, geological phenomena. So I would say it's probable that this is, once it's brought to Earth, let's say in a decade from now, NASA is planning to do that. Once they bring the materials back to Earth, then it's likely that there would be clear signatures that microbial life existed on early Mars. That would not be surprising. That would be my guess. But as of now, we don't have a definitive proof. We can say that it's likely, but it could also be some geological process that generated what they see. So it's intriguing, exciting, but frankly, I really believe that the search for intelligence out there is far more uplifting, because we can learn something new from a higher level of intelligence in interstellar space. It will inspire us to explore space. It will change the perception we have. It will bring a sense of modesty to, if we find the microbes, we still feel superior relative to these microbes. And they would be relatively boring intellectually. If we, if you go on a blind date and on the other side of the table there is a microbe, that's not very exciting. But if there is an intelligent being that you can learn from, and it's far more exciting, it's much better date. And the fundamental question is, on the first encounter, the first blind date with intelligence out there, whether we would have a friendly partner or maybe a serial killer. We don't know in advance, and that's why this should be a matter of international security, that we should decide how to respond to it by policymakers, by scientists that collect as much data as possible. And I very much hope that during my lifetime we will know more. The biggest mistake done so far is that people claim they know the answer in advance, and they just don't engage in seeking evidence.
Very good. Well, I appreciate all your information. You are going to be giving a speech at the Wicked Alien Boston Symposium. The people running it wanted me to bring that up at 1 p.m. coming up in October, and I think they're going to send me the video of that to post as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in that, and I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the viewers. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, so my message is really simple, that it's something that Galileo Galilei already instructed us, that new scientific knowledge should not be decided by authority. It should be decided by data, by evidence that anyone can understand, anyone can look at. And the mistake that we often make is that authorities have an agenda and they don't want us to look into the data. So they would tell us there are no anomalies. Everything is a rock. Anything you look in the sky is a rock. So Ross can go around and ask as many people as he wants, and they will tell him it's a rock. Why? Because those people are used to dealing with rocks. But if you go back before 1803, it was thought that rocks exist only on the ground. No rock should exist in space. And then there was a meteor shower in Liège, France in 1803 that convinced the mainstream, there are rocks in the sky. There are things falling down which are called meteors. And that changed the perception of the mainstream. And now that mainstream of meteor experts, comet experts, asteroid experts, they are used to having rocks in the sky, and they claim that everything in the sky must be rocks. Everything. And I say, don't you remember that over the past 50 years, we launched spacecraft out there, and now we know that, there are billions of Earth-Sun analogs in the Milky Way galaxy alone. So many of the stars are billions of years older than the sun, and they could have had a civilization that launched a spacecraft like Voyager billions of years ago. And it takes less than 1 billion years for such a spacecraft to make its way with our own technology, the same Voyager technology. It would take less than 1 billion years for that spacecraft to reach our backyard from the outskirts of the Milky Way galaxy. So given that, we know that we are polluting space with technological objects, why wouldn't we allow some of the objects that come our way to have been produced by extraterrestrial technological civilizations? That sounds to me like common sense. And yet it's being resisted, ridiculed. And, that is really strange. It's anti-science, because science is all about collecting evidence. But if you think that there is no point in collecting evidence, you will maintain your ignorance. You will be just like the Vatican that told Galileo to stay at home. He was in house arrest. And then 350 years later, because other people collected data, then the Vatican admitted that Galileo was right, 350 years after he died. And that was very embarrassing. And I don't want us to be in that situation with respect to the question. He was addressing the question of, are we at the center of the universe? I'm addressing the question, are we at the intellectual center of the universe? And I don't want us to be misled by authorities the same way. And the authorities include all those people that Ross was consulting with, because they just tell him what they want to believe based on their past knowledge. They had a training data set which was made of rocks. And that's why they keep claiming that anything we see must be rocks. And I'm just saying, let's be open-minded. And if there are anomalies, maybe it's not a rock.